Hello again. Walter Rauschenbusch, page 128, Christianity and the Social Crisis. This chapter, Social Impetus of Primitive Christianity, talking about the way that Christianity impressed itself on the, initially resistant Roman Empire. He says, it is the outcome of the close investigation which has been given to this subject in recent years that the framework of organization in the primitive churches was devised not for the conduct of worship, nor for teaching and preaching, but for the administration of the common life. The first step in organization was the appointment of the 7 at Jerusalem. It refers here to Acts chapter 6. And they were appointed to administer the fraternal help of the church with greater fairness. It has usually been assumed that these 7 were the first deacons. It now seems more probable that the deacons were a later contrivance for the purpose of rendering subsidiary assistance to the bishops, and that the 7 were the first elders. In that case, the original purpose of the presbyterate was not teaching, but organized helpfulness. The bishops of the early centuries were, first of all, great executive officers. They became teachers and theologians when doctrine and theology became so essential a part of church life. If these results of modern historical investigation are to any extent correct, they furnish a powerful proof of the fact that in the early Christian communities, the administration of mutual helpfulness was a very important part of their existence, and that their common life must have extended far beyond their common religious worship. If we inquire in what directions this fraternal helpfulness manifested itself, our information is far richer about the 3rd century than about the 1st or the 2nd. By that time, the organization of the churches had been centralized and perfected, and the charitable help was administered through this machinery. In the 1st century, the methods were crude and more spontaneous, but the spirit of it was probably purer than later, more democratic and less debased by the desire to win merits by ascetic almsgiving. From the outset, widows and orphans were extensively cared for. The social conditions of the ancient world and the impulses inherited from Judaism laid this duty upon the churches. About AD 250, the church at Rome had 1,500 dependents of that kind under its care. When Christians were imprisoned for their faith or exiled to the mines, the churches cared for their needs and comfort, often in lavish degree. It was not uncommon to ransom Christians imprisoned for debt. The proper burial of the dead was even more important to the sentiments of the ancient world than to ours. Just as today, the poorer classes organized in societies which guaranteed their members an honorable burial. The churches performed this service for their members. In public calamities like pestilence or the invasion of nomadic brigands, they stood by their members and sent aid to a distance. The duty of working was strictly urged in the primitive church. Holy idleness was the outgrowth of later asceticism. But if a man was out of work, the churches assumed the responsibility either of finding him a job or of caring for him. Thus the means of life were guaranteed him in either case. The church at Rome, living in the midst of vast pauperism, could boast that it had no beggar in its membership. The troubles coming upon them for their faith made Christians even more migratory than the rest of the city population of that day. But wherever they went, they were sure of Christian hospitality, and the first aid needed to get a foothold in a strange place. Hospitality was one of the fundamental Christian virtues in primitive Christian life. It was so open-handed that it invited exploitation by professional beggars. The heathen writer Lucian made the gullibility of the Christians part of the plot of his novelette on the death of Peregrinus Proteus. I wanted to link to a series we did on the Rodney Stark's book, The Rise of Christianity, where he talks about the difference between the pagan and the Christian responses to the pandemics of the 2nd and 3rd centuries. This particular one is, I think, the 3rd, and it has to do with the Christian response to the worst of the pandemic and the response of paganism, namely the last of the pagan emperors, Julian the Apostate.